Do you want to learn Tailwind CSS but feel overwhelmed by utility classes or don't know where to start? Well, in this crash course, you're going to master the core concepts of the newest version of Tailwind, from understanding how utility-first styling works to customizing your design system with theme variables and layers. We'll cover everything, starting from how Tailwind handles spacing, typography, layout, and colors, to how to use responsive breakpoints to make your site mobile-friendly. We'll even learn how to enable dark and light mode for modern theme-aware designs. Once we've got the fundamentals down, we'll build a clean and responsive website using Tailwind CSS and React.js, so you can see exactly how to structure and style real-world components like navbars, hero sections, and much more. Whether you're building a portfolio or scaling a production app, by the end of this video, you'll be confident on using Tailwind to design fast and beautiful UIs. However, learning a new technology is never easy, and for this reason, I always recommend a platform that helps you engage with the content while watching the videos. And today's sponsor, Brilliant, can help you with exactly that. Brilliant is a learning platform that helps you sharpen your thinking through fun, hands-on lessons in math, science, and programming. Their interactive style is a lot like Tailwind, practical, visual, and designed for understanding by doing. Personally, I loved taking their algorithms and data structure course. It helped me sharpen the exact thinking I use when designing database queries, structuring models, and what I had to do to actually pass my software engineering interviews. So whether you are brushing up on core math or leveling up your programming brain, Brilliant keeps things fun, effective, and incredibly rewarding. So if you're interested in that, just head out to brilliant.org/PedroTech or click the link below to try Brilliant for free for up to 30 days. And you'll also get a 20% off an annual premium subscription if you decide to stick with it. Thanks again, Brilliant, for supporting the channel. And now let's jump into Tailwind CSS. The easiest way for us to learn Tailwind in a framework agnostic way is by using the Tailwind CSS play in the Tailwind CSS website. So you just go to play.tailwindcss.com or click the link in the description. This way we can play around with Tailwind without having to show you guys how to configure it, because it is a bit different for depending on which framework you're using. At the end of this video, I'm going to show you guys how to set it up with React, and I'm going to build a website in React using Tailwind CSS. But for now, we want to focus primarily just on learning Tailwind. So with Tailwind Play, we can very easily try out different Tailwind classes without having to worry about the setup first. So when you guys go to this website, I want you guys to Command A and delete everything that is here. This over here is the HTML for the website that we're seeing on the right. And we want to start with the most basic stuff in Tailwind. So the first concept in Tailwind that I think you should learn is Tailwind colors. So it is super easy for you to set colors, either text color or just background colors in any of your Tailwind elements. Tailwind's color utilities allow you to easily set them, and by using the Tailwind's default color palette, you'll be able to apply different primary colors and shades to any part of your website. Now you can also add some custom colors, and I'll show you guys how to do that. But let's do here as an example, let's add a paragraph tag that says hello world. So this here is the HTML side of this website. Obviously there's the CSS, but with Tailwind, we put all the styles directly inside of the HTML. And we do that through the class names of each individual element. So for example, if I want to change the color of this text to be red, what I have to do is I have to add a class, and then in here, I have to add the class name in Tailwind that applies a change in the color of this text. Now, you will memorize the class names from Tailwind as you get used to writing more Tailwind projects. So it might be a bit confusing, and in the beginning, you might not be used to it, but trust me, in your second project building with Tailwind, you'll already start picking all of this up. But the way you apply a color to a text is you write text, and usually with every single change that you're applying to a text, any text on your website, it will always start with the text keyword. Then you put a hyphen and you write the name of the color. Now, the two most basic colors are white and black. If I want to make this black, I say text black, and as you can see, nothing has changed because this was already black. But if I change this to white, I can do text white, and now it's invisible because it is white. Now, they are the two most basic colors. And we don't have to actually apply any shades or any values to them because black and white is black and white. You know, it's either black or it's white. However, there are other colors that we can apply, and all of them have different values to them that are associated with the color. So what do I mean? Well, go to this website over here. It's tailwindcss.com/doc/colors, or click the link in the description, and you'll see the default color palette for Tailwind CSS colors. You will most likely always have this open on on your browser, and you will reference this, even though you will start to get used to the color numbers and the color names, and thus eventually won't have to look at this. Basically, Tailwind has a variety of different default colors. You see here, we have some of the common ones like red, orange, yellow, green, blue, and so on. But then there's some other cool ones like fuchsia, or whatever, how to say that, but purple. I mean, actually purple is pretty normal, but teal, emerald, lime, amber, and so on. And you can see the color that it's referenced to it, but you also see a bunch of numbers over here. Now the numbers are the amount of that color that you want to apply. So for example, if you apply 50 to all of the colors here, you see there's a bunch of colors, 50 is the smallest number. Most of them at 50 will kind of look white because you're not applying much of that color. But as you go up, you see that it becomes more and more red, at least for the red example, and darker and darker. So this is how light of the color it is, and this is how dark of the color it is. So if you want to, for example, have a normal green, you would do text green, and you go to the middle, which would be around 500. And if you want to make it darker, you do green 950 or 900. If you pretty much want it very white, you can just do green 50. Now, what do I mean by that? If we want to come over here and I want to make this be red, and I want to make this be a very red color, so this over here, right? So red 600. I just come here and I say this text is text red 600. And you see, we get the change in the color. If I want to make it darker, I can make it 900, or even the darkest, which is 950. And then it almost looks like black. But I can also make it 300. And it looks like a pinkish color because it is a lighter red. And you can do the same thing with all the other colors. I really like using emerald. It's like a type of green. I use it in almost every product. I also love using violet. So if I say violet 500, it's kind of like purple. It looks really nice. So you will get used to changing colors like this. And it's super easy. You just write the color. Also, you'll see this will show up over here. In most code editors, you can just take a look at what this color is and change it yourself. But this is how easy it is to change a text color. Now, what if we want to change the color of a div, right? Let's actually put this paragraph tag inside of a div. And on this div, I want to apply here a background to it. Well, the way to do this is to use the BG class. BG means background. And you can do a lot of things to a background, but the most common is applying a color to it. So similar to how we applied a color to the text by saying text and then applying the actual value for the color, we can do the exact same thing here. I can apply a background color of emerald 500, and you see that the background of this div has that color. Now, you might be wondering, okay, but what if I don't want to use these colors? What if I have a very specific either hexadecimal or RGB color that I want to use? I don't want to use any of the default Tailwind colors. Because at the end of the day, if you are using a default Tailwind color, you are pretty much having to follow the standard that a lot of other websites will have as well, and it might lose a little bit of uniqueness to your website, even though it's hard to not use one of these colors. So what I would say is, here's how you can apply a custom color. When you see the value of the color over here, for example, we are applying the violet 500 here. Instead of writing violet 500, you can put square brackets. And what a square bracket will do is in here, you can write a value for a different color, a custom color, in whichever format you want. For example, if I want to make this a reddish color and I want to use hexadecimal, I just come here, put the hexadecimal symbol, and I put the value for the hexadecimal. And all of a sudden, I apply that color. If I want to use RGB to make like a pink color, I could just come here. And for RGB, it's a bit different. You don't put a hashtag, you put an RGB function like this. And inside of it, you can put the three colors. So for a pink color in RGB, it would be something like this: 245 for red, 39 for green, and 166 for blue. And then you might have noticed that I don't get any changes. Now, why exactly didn't I get any changes? Well, I did this on purpose because I wanted to point out an important concept that you need to keep into account. When you're writing class names, they are directly parsed and translated into styles. You need to be very specific with your spacing. So for example, if I were to do this, all of a sudden the color doesn't work, right? Same thing with this. We put some spaces in between the commas, and based on the Tailwind class names library, this doesn't work. I can delete this, and all of a sudden the styling actually works, and this becomes pink. So make sure you always put the correct spaces and you don't actually have any extra things, because that will cause a bug and you might get confused on what's wrong. So now let's go into a bit of a more important topic. And what I'm talking about is, how do you apply margins and paddings in Tailwind? Well, when you're building your website, applying the correct margins and paddings are extremely important because they create the spacing of your layout, and also they are essential for making your website responsive. With Tailwind, it is super simple for you to actually add any margin or padding to your stuff. So I'm actually going to delete these colors just because they are a bit annoying. Actually, I might keep the background as this and the color as black for the text. And what I want to do is, let's start with something simple. How do I apply a padding to this div over here? If I add a padding, just a general padding, this text should go a bit down and a bit to the right, because then there will be a left padding here and a padding to the top, as well as some padding on the other side and at the bottom. However, we don't have any text there, so it might not be fully visible. Now, how do we do that? Well, the easiest way to apply a padding is by using the P keyword. And a P is standing for padding, right? And you can apply a value, a unit, to this padding by putting a number after the P. You see that they provide here with a bunch of options, at least the autocomplete of the Tailwind play. But for example, if I put here a padding of 4, you notice immediately that this gets pushed a bit down and a bit to the right. Now, what does a padding of 4 stand for? Well, there is this website, which is another website that I loved using back in the day when I was learning Tailwind, and I highly recommend you using as well. It is called the Tailwind cheat sheet. And in here, you can see what each class name in Tailwind translates to in normal CSS. So for example, a P4 translates to a padding of 1 rem. And we use rem here specifically to make it responsive. And if you were to translate that to pixels, it would be around 16 pixels. So you see, we have a bunch of actual sizings. And I know it seems kind of not intuitive for you to memorize what each of these numbers mean, like why is 48 corresponding to 12 rem and to 192 pixels? Like, why memorize that? Why isn't it just, I don't know, P12 to be 12 rem or P192 to be 192 pixels? But the thing is, as you move with your website, you can very easily change that without having to move files. For example, if I had to change the padding on this to see if a bigger padding would work, I just come here and I put 8, and all of a sudden it worked. It's bigger. You know, I don't have to move to a different CSS file and make the changes there and then recompile everything. Super easy, just change it here and you'll see the effects. Now, in this case, we're applying some general padding to this in all directions. What if I only want to apply padding to one direction? What if I only want to apply the padding in the X direction? Well, I could come here and say PX, which means that I'm applying padding on the X direction. You see now there's no padding at the top and there's only padding on the left. Same thing with PY, which is only padding on the Y direction. And now there's no padding on the X direction, only on the Y. I could still do this and it would be redundant because it's the same thing as doing this, right? Because that applies to all directions. Now, the same way how you can apply stuff to specific vertical and horizontal directions, you can go even deeper and apply padding and margins to only one place. So if you think of a rectangle, for example, we have the left, we have the right, we have the top, and we have the bottom. I can apply a padding just to the left if I say PL, which means padding and left. I can apply it to the right by saying PR, which since we have no text here, it's not visible or it just doesn't represent it well. I can apply it just on the top direction by saying PT. And you see now, this is well as good for us to see because now the text is stuck at the bottom, but there's a padding at the top. And I can do the exact same thing for the bottom by saying PB, and it will apply the padding there. This is all great. And this is pretty much how you work with padding. But what do we do when we want to apply some margin? Well, to apply a margin, I can actually do it over here. Since this is outside of the div, we'll be able to see it better with the colors. If I want to apply a margin on all directions, I do the exact same thing. But instead of saying P, I use M. So I can apply a margin of 6 in all directions, and it will have a margin in this element. I can apply a margin in the X direction, on the Y direction, on the right, on the left, on the top, and on the bottom. So you start getting how margins and paddings work. I highly recommend that while you're working with spacing like this, you always keep this open, right? So when I'm working with Tailwind, it's not that big of a deal. I always have on hand the colors and the cheat sheet open so that I can very easily check. Now, the next concept that I think you need to master is probably the concept that you're going to be using the most throughout your Tailwind journey, which is utilizing layouts. And the reason why layouts are important is because pretty much almost all Tailwind CSS websites are responsive by default, because the way Tailwind provides layouts to us makes it super easy for us to make it responsive. So Tailwind will give us incredible power to control our layout. This includes Flexbox, grid, the width and the height of our layouts, any spacing and responsive behavior. And there are a couple classes that are super useful to make this happen. So to understand this, I actually want to build a real page. In here, we're going to be building a page like for my normal website, which has a navbar, a main core portion of it, and a footer. And we'll start by building the actual page. And we'll create that page by having a div, which inside of it, we're going to have the navbar, which we'll have to create. It's going to have some links. Then we're going to have below it the core concept of the project, so the core. And then we're going to have the footer. Now, obviously, they're not styled right now. And we want to actually define a background to this page. Now, what kind of background do we want to have? Well, I want to make it very, very clear, right? Because it's a web page. I mean, I'm making this in light mode. So I want to kind of make it slightly teal. So I'm going to get this color over here, teal 200. So I'll say BG teal 200. That seems a bit too much. I'll make it 100. Perfect. Now we notice that our page isn't the full height of our website, right? And that's bad because I want the footer to be stuck at the bottom and I want the navbar to be stuck at the top. So how do I increase the height of this entire div? Well, if I want to adjust the height or the width per se as well, I can do that by applying a value to the H class name. So H stands for height. And as you can see, I can give a unit to the height, similar to how we were applying a unit, so a number, to the padding and the margin. So I can say the height is 16. And that's actually bad because a height of 16, if you look here and you go to height, you actually see that the value of H16 corresponds to a height of only 64 pixels or 4 rem. So if I want to make it bigger, if I want to make the height of the page be, for example, 80, I can come here, say height 80, and you see it's much bigger. But this isn't really what we want. We want it to be the full size of our screen. So to do this, we can say that the height is the height of the screen. And all of a sudden, it fills up the entire screen. Now to change the width, even though the width is already what we want it to be the whole width, we can do this. We can apply a width property and I can make it, for example, 30. And then it will be a lot smaller. I can make it 10. It's a lot smaller. But those units, again, they are great because they are responsive. And that's the whole point of why I recommend using them. But you can also apply direct translation to them. So if I want to make the width of this be like 560 pixels, it's very specific. I don't think it's one of the options over here. Yeah, it doesn't seem like it. So if I want to make the width of this be 560, the way I apply 560 pixels is by opening and closing square brackets and writing the value over here with a px in the end. And all of a sudden, you see that the width is applied. I can make this 590. I can make this, I don't know, 5,000, whatever I want. But by default, the value for the width is already filling up the screen. And the reason for that is because we can make an element take the full width, and we can do that by saying width full. Or in this case, we can also make the width be the size of the screen. The width being the size of the screen is the same thing as the height, which means that it is making the size be actual corresponding to the size of the page in the browser. But if you make width be full, it will just make the width be the size, the entire size or the entire width of the container that it's inside of. Now you can also apply other versions or variations of the height and the width. For example, instead of saying that the height has to be something, I can set the max height to be something. I can say the max height needs to be 90 or 4, and then it will obviously be smaller. One thing that is very common is for you to actually apply a minimum height to be the screen, because then if you scroll down, it will actually not fill up the entire page. Now that we understand how to set up the height of this stuff, let's start working with the building the page. So the first thing we need to do is we need to set up the navbar. And the way I want this navbar to be is I want there to be 3 links on the navbar. It should have a home link, a blog link, and a contact link. So to 3 different pages that don't exist on this website. And I want them to appear one next to the other on this distinctive navbar that shapes up as a rectangle at the top of our page. To do that, I'm going to come to this div over here, which is the div for the navbar, and I want to apply some class names. Now, in this class, I want to first make it have the width and make it be full. Now, the first thing I want to do with this class is I want to apply a color to it. I want it to be the color of the navbar. I'll make the navbar have a cool color. Let's choose one over here. I'm going to have let's make it teal 500. So we're going to come here. We're going to say BG teal 500. Then I want to make it have some padding. So we'll put a padding on the X direction of something like 6. So padding of 6. And we can also put a padding on the Y direction. Now, why don't we just use a normal P tag to put a padding on all directions? Well, I want the padding on the Y direction to be a little bit more customizable. Like, let's make it 4 instead of 6. Then inside of this navbar, I actually want to put 2 elements. I want to have an H1 tag that is going to be the name of the website or the logo. I can call it my website. And then we're going to have here a nav. And the nav is just going to be a container for all of our links. So I'll make here an A tag that is going to be for the home page. And I'll put, just as an example here, an href that won't take you literally anywhere because this is a single page app. And then we're going to create 3 links, one for the home, one for the blog, and one for the contact. Now there's a clear issue with this. First of all, I want to make the color of all of these texts to be white because black doesn't really match with this. So what I can do is on this total div over here, this big div container, I can apply a text white here and it will make the text white. White seems a bit too strong, so I'll actually apply teal 100 as the color to actually match the background of the website. Now the second issue is that this is the title of the website and this are the links. I want the title of the website to appear on the left and the links to appear on the right. So if you think about it, we kind of want there to be 2 columns. One that is going to be the one for the logo of the website and another column on the right for the 3 links. Now, how do I apply those columns? Well, the easiest way is to use a type of display or use, for example, in this case, a Flexbox. Now, to make an item become a Flexbox, the easiest way to do it is to come to the bigger div, right? The div that we want to turn it into a Flexbox and just add the class Flex. immediately, because it's a Flexbox, you notice that the stuff is now one next to the other. Because by default, the direction of a Flexbox is a row. And a row is basically saying that when you want to stack the children of this Flexbox, you put them in one single row, one next to the other. But if I want to change the direction and I want to make it, for example, such that the items are now stacked vertically, I can apply the direction by saying flex and then applying, for example, column, which will make it into a column. I can also apply column reverse, and you'll see that the items are now in a column direction, but also reversed, which is kind of weird, but it's just one thing you can do. And you can also do the same thing with row. I can say row reverse, and they appear on the right instead of on the left, because by default, the direction is row. That's why it looks like this even without this. Now, we have applied this Flexbox over here, but this my website over here still isn't on the left. I mean, it is on the left side, but the other links should appear on the right side. Now, you might think that the easiest way to make this appear on the right is to come to this nav over here and maybe apply a margin in between the nav items and the H1 tag, right? I could probably say margin left 50. And actually, let me make it a specific value for you guys. Can make it 500 pixels. And you'll see that, yes, it looks like it's appearing over here. But obviously, this is not really good because it makes it very hard for us to move around and it's not responsive. The easiest way for us to make this happen is to use a justify between. Now, a justify between, if you come over here and you go to content, you see that this justify content classes controls how flex items are positioned along a container's main axis. So what a justify between class does is it applies, if you're familiar with CSS by default, it applies a space between. And in this case, this is great because if I were to come over here and I were to say justify between, you'll see that it puts a space in between the two main children of this div. And now we have the logo and the links on the other side. But now this looks great, but there is too little of a gap in between these links. And I want to put a bigger gap. How do I do that? You might think that it might be easy to then come here and, for example, after each of them, apply a margin, just like what we talked about. Put a margin on the left direction of, I don't know, 50 or something. But no, this isn't good. This does apply a gap in between them, but you would then have to come and apply this on all of them, which is not good. An easy way for us to make this happen is to make this nav, the one that has the links, into a flex as well. And now they are kind of together. But with this, we can easily apply a value for the gap in between the different flex items through the gap keyword. And this is super useful. I use this all the time. I always make flex boxes and then I put a gap in between them. I can apply, for example, a gap of 4. And it easily applies a space in between each of the items with a value of 4. And this is the basics of working with a Flexbox layout. Now, there's other types of layouts as well, and we are going to get there, especially when we start building the core or the main part of the website. We're going to be working with a grid and other types as well. But for now, I want to go back a little bit and teach you guys a little bit about how to style your texts, and I mean your fonts. So there are a lot of classes that you can use to style the appearance of your text. We obviously have learned about how to work with colors, but we've never learned how to work with, for example, changing the size, the font size, how to change the spacing in between the letters. We can even do that, and other stuff like making the text bold and so on. So I want to go a little bit into that just so we get that out of the way. We make this Navbar look even better, and we continue with the layouts. So the first thing that we can learn is how do I make, for example, the text for the title of the website, so the my website part over here. How do I change the size of the font? So the way we can do this is there is a class that you can apply to the text, and that class is the size. Now there's 3 defined sizes. For example, now there are a variety of different sizes you can put by default. It starts from the smallest one, which is extra small. So XS means extra small, and as you can see, it changes the size of the text to a much smaller size. You can also make it, for example, small. You can make it base. You can make it medium. You can make it large, or you can make it XL. Now, when you use XL like this is actually something that you might use in a variety of different places in your project. And after XL, you can actually make it bigger by just adding a number in front of the XL. So if I want to make it bigger than XL, I can make the font be 2XL or 3XL or 4 and so on. So this is how sizing works. Of course, the custom sizing would work as well. I could just make this be specifically 25 pixels and that would work too. However, again, always recommend you to use the predefined class names from Tailwind. If you want to go to the cheat sheet and you want to check it out, just go to font size and you'll see all of the options that they have over here. So for the font size, it is pretty simple. You just have to remember extra small, small, large, and XL. So in this case over here, I would probably make it large just because it's a title, right? But this doesn't really look that much different from this, right? It's kind of thin. So how do I change the weight of this font? The easiest way to do this is by accessing, since we're changing something for the font, we actually will use the font keyword. And after it, we can apply a variety of different effects to the font. As you can see, to change the weight of the font, for example, to make it bold, I can just say font bold and it will become bold. I can make it semi-bold and sometimes you can make it light, which as you can see, looks kind of cool. Oh, I think they swapped automatically. I think when I saved this, it just swapped the thing. But yeah, the font is over here. I'm actually going to make this be bold because I think it looks better. But if you actually want to make it the most bold possible, there's also extra bold. Now, the last thing I want to talk about with relation to typography is the spacing in between the letters. So you can actually customize that very easily by using the tracking class. And there's a variety of different options that you can apply for the tracking. So the tracking is just the letter spacing. And I can make it super wide by adding this. This is not that wide, to be honest. Let me make it the widest, as you can see. And there's a bunch of space. It doesn't look that wide because of our font. Since the weight is high, it makes it not look that far away. But if I make it light, you see it becomes a bit more apparent. But it's just something cool that you can customize on your project. I usually like to either use tighter or tight because I like things, I like the text a bit tighter, but I just wanted to show you guys that we are not actually going to touch it for this project. Now that we got that out of the way, let's learn about our second layout type, which is the grid layout. And this one is actually really cool. So we're going to build here the core part of our website. And what we want to build here is actually a section that will include first a text here that will say an H2 tag. It will say welcome, like welcome to the website. Then we're going to have a paragraph tag. So it's kind of like a hero section. So it's going to say this is the main content area of the website. And then below this section, we're going to have another portion over here. And in here, we're going to have a list. So we're going to say features, and it's going to have 3 features. So we're going to have here a list of features. So I want to make a div. And on this div, I want to include a div here. No. And on this div, I want to include individual divs. So I'm going to have one for feature 1, and I'm going to have one for feature 2 and feature 3. Now, obviously, this might sound a bit confusing just because what even is this website? What are features? What does this mean? Well, we're just going to organize it in a way such that this is going to be a list that we want to display, and we're going to be using the grid layout to do that. And we're going to have this section, which is kind of like the welcome section, which we'll probably want to put at the middle of the page. So let's start with styling the first section, which is this one over here. The reason why we'll start with this is because We already know everything up to this point. It's just going to be some styling of like the font and so on. So for the H2 tag over here, what we want to do is we just want to set the size of this font to be large. More specifically, since it's like the welcome section, I want to make it XL, so I'll make it pretty big. Then I want to set the font to be semi-bold, make it a little bit stronger. And I also want to put a margin from this to the bottom. So I want to put a margin from the bottom of this text to this paragraph tag. So to do that, I'm going to say margin bottom of 4. Now, this also should have a margin of around a little bit more actually from the navbar. So I can go to our navbar, which is this whole section over here, and I can add a margin bottom to it of, for example, 8. And now there's some space over here. Make this a bit bigger so you guys can see. Now, I want to put this in the middle of our page. So I want to center this. How do we do that? Well, to do that, what we can do is we can say text center. And text center will center the text. You could technically say text right, for example, put it on the right, or text left and put it on the left. But text center is the best location for us to put this. Now, for this paragraph tag, what we want to do is we basically just want to center it as well. So how do we do this? Well, we could just put a text center here as well. But an easier way to make this happen is actually to bring this text center to the top here, to the section, and it will actually center both of them. Great. Now let's go to the second section. And this section is actually what I wanted to get at, because this is where we're going to apply the grid. We'll start with the features title over here. I'm going to apply the exact same styling as we did here. Then I'm going to center the features. So I'm going to say center, text center. And I'll put a margin bottom to this. And you might have noticed that in here, there's obviously a small space in between this section and this section. We'll deal with that later. For now, let's just build the grid structure for these features over here. And what we want to do with this is we kind of want to make it into 3 columns, right? We want to have 3 columns where it's like 1, 2, and 3. So to do that, what we can do is on this parent div over here, we will put the display type instead of flex to be grid. Now, what does this mean? Well, with grid, we can actually define a column-like structure or a grid-like structure that has a variety of different columns. And we can specify the amount of columns. So right now, what the value here is that it has 1 column. And that's why it has everything is on top of each other. And to specify the number of columns, you do exactly this. You say grid, calls, and you put the number. Now, like I said, by default, it's 1. But what happens when I put 2? All of a sudden, you notice that those 3 items has now become into a group of 2 columns. Obviously, it looks a bit weird because since it's 3 items and it's 2 columns, one of the columns have to have 2 items. But if we were to add another item over here, that one would go to the other column as well. Now, in our case, we actually want to make it into 3 columns. So each of them have their own columns. And for each columns, we want to apply some styling. So for example, I want to add a background to them so we can easily see the different columns. So I'm going to say this has a background of teal, and I'm going to make it be teal 600. That looks a bit weird. Let me make it 400. And then I'll apply this, I'll put a padding of 4 on the whole thing. Then I'm going to copy all of this and paste it over here. And I want there to be a gap in between them, because now since I put a color for them, you might have noticed that it looks like they're all merged. But no, they're actually divided, but there's no gap in between them. If you remember, when we wanted to put a gap in between items in a Flexbox over here, what we did was we used the gap keyword. So we used a gap of 4 and a gap appeared in between this. It's the same thing with the grid. We have a grid over here and we have items on this grid. If we want to put a gap in between them, we can just use the gap property. So in this case, let's put a gap of 6 and you might notice that it actually looks like a grid. Now we have a perfectly good looking grid structure. If I were to add more and more items, you see that it follows into the correct columns. But look at what happens when we move this, right? It's responsive to some extent. Look, if it gets really small, sometimes it doesn't look good to have 3 columns. Sometimes it might be better to move from 3 to 2 columns to even 1 when it gets this small. Now to do that, we have to detect the size of the screen, right? To change the name of columns, the number of columns, we have to detect the size of the screen. And you can easily do that in Tailwind. Tailwind provides to us a set of responsive design utilities that allows us to apply different styles depending on the screen size. The screen size are actually based on breakpoints that Tailwind defines, and we can customize them if we need. So Tailwind defines a size for what it thinks a small screen is, a medium screen is, a large screen is, and what an extra large or a 2XL screen is. Now the values for them, you can go and find them on the Tailwind cheat sheet, but basically a small screen for them, I believe it's like, it has a minimum width of 640 pixels, and then a large one is like 1024, stuff like that. And the way this works is by using the keywords and applying specific styles for that. So before we move into the grid, let me show you guys an example with this text over here. It's going to be the most evident example ever. Imagine that I want this text to be bigger and smaller, or even change colors depending on the size of the screen. Actually, let's make it change color. I think it makes it more evident. So right here, we have this really small screen, right? So I could come over here and apply some style to the color. This is the color by default, it's black. But what happens if we want to apply a style to the color after a certain amount of pixels? So if the size of the screen is bigger than a certain amount, we want to change the color. In this case, we can use the SM or small class, put a colon, and then put a Tailwind class after this to demonstrate what we want to happen if the screen is bigger than what Tailwind defines a small screen to be. So in my case, I just explained to you guys that a small screen for Tailwind is around 640 pixels. So in here, the width of the screen is not 640. So this would be around 640 pixels, right? So if I were to, for example, change the text, let's make the text here be red 500. Notice how I just added this style, but nothing happened to this text. Now look what happens when I grow and I go past the 640 mark. Boom, it becomes red. So I applied a style that only happens after the screen size is bigger than the small screen size. Now it's still red and on everything after that. So we could actually add a different color for screens that are considered medium size, so bigger than around 768 pixels, which is what the MD size means. In this case, let's make it be violet 500, which is purple. So you see that after around 760, it becomes purple. And so on. You can do this as well with large. So you can come here and apply large and make it be, I think like sky is one color. I can make it become blue. You see eventually it will become blue and so on. So this is how you change the style. And obviously I used color in this case, but this is more applicable with things like font size. You can make the font size huge when it's, you know, a smaller screen. For example, I can make it such that if everything is bigger than a small screen, we can make it have a text of, it's already text XL, so I'll make it text XL. But then in a really, really small screen, we can make it be 4XL. So you see that as it becomes big, it is small. And then when it's a small screen and it needs to be more visible, then it becomes big. So this is how you apply different breakpoints and different screen sizes in Tailwind. But how does this apply to the grid? Well, like I said, when it's a small screen, we might want to have a different amount of grid columns. This is very common. Like in a big screen, we might want to have 3 columns. In a medium screen, we might want to have 2. And then in a small screen, we might want to have 1. So what I want to do here is I want to come to our grid calls, like our grid class name, where we define the amount of columns. And we could say that after a screen of size medium, then we'll have a grid colors of 3. So that means that on this size, it becomes 3, but as we go to below medium, it becomes only 1. But still not good. I think in here, we could have 2 columns, right? We don't have to go from 3 to 1. So what we do is we say small. So after a small screen, we can make the grid calls amount to be 2. And now you see it goes from 3 to 2 to 1. But we haven't put the 1. And the reason why we didn't need to put 1 is because by default, like I said, the column amount is 1. So it's the same thing as us coming here and putting this. And if you get confused, the amount that you don't put anything behind is the smallest amount. So if you don't put anything behind, that's the smallest amount. So we can go from 3 to 2 to 1. And let me put some margin in this. I think it would warrant it. Actually, some padding on the X direction of like 6. I think it looks a lot better this way. Perfect. Yeah, this looks great, right? So it's fully responsive and it looks great. Now, I feel like this section over here can have a bit more space from the top. And you could easily argue that you could just come over here and say margin top, I don't know, 4, right? Margin top 4. And this will create the space. But I actually want to teach you guys a really cool concept. And this concept is the concept of space. So instead of putting a margin top of 4, what if I could just come to the parent div, so where we have this section and this section, and apply a gap in the y direction between both sections. So I could do this. I could come over here and say class, and then space on the y direction and make it 12. And you see that now there's a space of 12 in between them. I could make it smaller as well, like 8. And if I were to add more sections, all of them would already have that margin inside of them. See, we don't have to put the margin top on any of them. You just set it to the parent div, you choose the direction, and that's fine. Now, let's learn about how we can style individual elements. So for example, let's make this little div over here look a lot better by adding a little bit of roundness to it. So how do we do that? Well, to do that, we can use the rounded class. So I could come here to each of the features and I can add this property called rounded. And you see that it will immediately add a border radius to the item. Now, there is different values that you can pass to this rounded. You can pass it to be 2XL, that will make it very big. You can make it be large, that will make it slightly bigger. You can make it small, and then it's very small. I personally like to make it just rounded, which makes it very very small, just like a small corner to it. So I'm gonna add it to all of them. And I'm gonna copy this and I'll just paste it on all of them. And I'll be back in a second. Now, what I wanna do is I kinda wanna put an effect to all of these features. I wanna be able to hover through them as if when I'm hovering through them, they kind of expand and change colors or whatever you wanna do to them. So how do I apply a hover effect? Well, to apply a hover effect, I just put the keyword hover, similar to how you would in normal CSS, and then you can do something to it. What I like to do is usually I like to get the color, right? This color over here, it's the color that I already have. And I like to do something interesting to it. You see, nothing really happens when I hover in it right now. This is the feature 1, is the only one that I applied a hover effect. But if I were to, for example, I wanna turn this into, I wanna make it such that when I hover through it, it will become the same color, but just a little bit less opaque. So a little bit less visible. How do I make that happen? I can actually decrease the opacity of a color by dividing this color by the percentage of how much I want this color to be. So 90 means I want it to be 90% visible. You see that now when I hover it, it now changes a bit the visibility. Now it's not that visible, so it's very visible, so I can make it 20% and it will become even easier to see the difference. But I like to usually make it around 80, so there's a clear change when I hover. Now, I also want to make it such that the text maybe changes its color, so I'll make the text maybe become white. Actually, that looks pretty bad. Let me make it become this color over here. It's like a very thin teal. And I only want to make that happen when you hover. So I'm going to say when you hover, that happens. And then here it is. When I hover, you see it changes the text and the color. So I'm going to copy this over here and I'm going to paste it on all of them so that now all of them have the same hovering effect. And now as you can see, I can hover through them and they will change the color. One thing that I like to do when you hover stuff, if you're doing with buttons or whatever, you can add a shadow to your elements. So a shadow is a utility that is used to add a box shadow to the elements, and it is one of the most overused classes in Tailwind because of how easy it is to add. For example, if I want to add a shadow when I hover this, it is as easy as coming over here. I'm going to just add another class name to the first feature, and I'm going to add, when you hover this thing, I want to add a shadow that is large. You see that now when I hover this, there's a small shadow at the bottom. And that's really cool because it gives a bit of depth to your elements and it just makes it look overall nicer. There's obviously different sizes. You can make it small and then it's just a slight shadow, or you can make it even huge, so 2XL, and it will become massive. The one that I think is the least useful is the inner shadow, which just creates a shadow inside of the element. If you even understand what that is, just an inset shadow, as you can see. But shadows are really cool. I like to make them when you hover, and I make them large. Now we can finish up this website by just adding a footer to this. Now the footer is going to be super simple. We want to add like a text here for the footer. I'm just going to make it into the copyright logo and then say 2025, my website, all rights reserved, you know, the classic footer. And what I want with this footer is I want it to have the same color as the navbar, right? So I'm going to grab this color. I'm going to put it over here. I'm going to add a class name. And I want it to be stuck at the bottom. How do I get that to happen? Because what I can do is, let's just style this initially. Let me make this be let me center the text of the footer. So I'm going to text center. I'll also set the size of the text to be a little bit smaller. So text small. And I want to set the color to be the teal 100, the same as the navbar. Then let's just have a padding in the Y direction. Let's make it 6. So this is a normal padding, but I want to put it down here. Well, to do this, I actually need to make some changes to our page over here. What I need to do is I need to make this div over here have a display of flex and the direction be flex column. Then I want to add a class name to this div in between the navbar and the footer, because the footer is at the bottom no matter what. So what I need is the space in between this to grow to maximize the space for it. Now, how do I do that? Well, I can use the flex grow property in CSS, which is an extension of Tailwind. It basically defines how much a flex item should grow relative to other items inside the same flex container. Since we made this div a flex, and now all of this are inside that container, we need to put this to be a flex grow to make it such that it will grow as much as the container allows and create the space for the footer to be at the bottom. Now, the only problem is when it's a small screen, because in that situation, we can just put maybe a margin top of like, I don't know, 4, and that will create some space. And then in this case, there's obviously a lot of space there too. So great, we created a simple website using Tailwind and going over most of the most common class names that you should know for getting started with Tailwind. Now, I want to show you guys how to set up your own project in React using Vite and how to set up Tailwind with that. And on top of that, we're going to be styling a simple React project, which will include some other concepts that I couldn't explain here. For example, light and dark mode, and having your own custom colors and so on. So those are stuff that I want to set up on that project. If you're learning Tailwind because you're going to be using NextJS, all of this stuff will still be applicable, but it's even easier if you have NextJS as a project, because NextJS, by using the create next app command, already sets up Tailwind for you. So in our case, we need to set it up ourselves. So we're going to do that. Okay, Now let's learn about a very cool topic, which is in many situations you might be building a website that you want to have two different themes. A theme for if your user has their computer set up for light mode, and a theme for whether the user has a computer set up for dark mode. And more importantly, you want to allow the user to switch between the two options. So I deleted everything that we had so far because we're going to kind of restructure things now. And I kind of want to change the overall feel of the website. To make it simple for you guys to understand the difference between dark and light mode, I want to make the background of this page be white. So I want to make it simple. I will change the BG to white. And for the navbar over here, I'm going to probably change this to be black. So I'll make it BG black, and this should be good to go. And then this, what we can do is, what I like to do with the navbar in a white website is I keep it as white, just as it is, but then I like to put a shadow to it. So I'll put a shadow and I'll make it a big shadow, so a shadow large. And then we have kind of this shadow at the bottom. Now, obviously the text is different because we want to have some color to them. So we're going to change here from text being teal and we're going to make it be text black. So this is what a navbar would look like in a white or a light mode website. Now, what I want to do is I want to add a button that is going to exist right next to this contact. I'm going to add here a button. And on this button, I want to say something like this, toggle theme. Now, obviously, in a real website, if you're using a framework, you could make it such that maybe the toggle is like an emoji of a moon. And then when you click at it, it becomes an emoji of a sun. But since we're just coding on Tailwind Play, that kind of state management of our UI really doesn't work. So what we want here is just to have this button. So this is just a button that when you click, it is going to change the theme. So how does that work? Well, first things first, what theme are we in right now? Well, we're actually in dark mode right now. And why are we in dark mode? Well, because if you see, the Tailwind Play website has this blue outline over here, and that only exists because my computer is in dark mode. If I actually went to my computer's appearance section, at least if this is a Mac, and I were to switch to light mode, you would see that the whole page becomes white, which is not what we want, right? But in this case, let's keep it as dark. Now, this isn't how the website is supposed to look like in dark mode. We actually want to apply some styling to this website that would only apply if the user is in dark mode. So the first thing we need to do to get that working is every time you want to apply the ability for the user to switch between having light and dark mode, you have to go to your CSS file. And the CSS file in a Tailwind project is extremely important because if you don't have a CSS file, your Tailwind project doesn't work. When you set up a Tailwind project, you have to have one CSS file, usually the global CSS file. And in there, you need to, at the top of the page, write this, import Tailwind CSS. If this doesn't exist, none of the styles do. So make sure that you keep that there. And obviously, since we're using Tailwind Play, that is there by default. But every time you create a project with a framework that installs Tailwind by default, they will add this to your project as well. Now, down here, what we want to do to enable dark mode is we want to paste this line of code. Now, what this does is it allows us to apply dark mode capabilities to our styles. And because of that, if I wanted to come here, right now, the styling that we wrote is by default the styling that shows up in either light mode or dark mode because we never specified anything. But if I want to make a change, if I want to make a change such that, for example, the background of this page is only white in light mode, but in dark mode, it will be something else. What I can do is come over here, apply the dark keyword, and put a style right after it. And whatever style I apply here will only happen if the user is in dark mode. So in this case, if the user is in dark mode, let's make the background be black. All of a sudden, the background is black. And that's because I am in dark mode, just like I showed you. But if I switch to light mode, you'll see that all of a sudden, the background is black. And that's because we are in dark mode. But if I were to go to my Google Chrome settings and I switch it to light mode, this is what happens. You see that the whole page switches and the individual website changes as well. So let me go back to dark mode so we can adapt this even further. So in dark mode, since the background is black, we definitely want to change the color of the text to be white, because if it's black when the background is white, we want it to be white when the background is black. So there's a couple ways to do this. If I was gonna come over here at the top and say, in a dark mode, I want the text to be white, it wouldn't work. Now, the reason why it wouldn't work is because the text then turns black no matter what at the inner layer of this declaration, meaning that this will take precedence. So instead of doing that, we want to copy this, and where we declare the color of the text, which is in this div over here, we say text black, we make the text be white in dark mode. And then we can clearly see that this is what shows up. Now, what I usually like to do is, instead of just setting the background to be completely black, I like to use another color. For example, what I can do is I can make the entire background be a slight bluish color. So I see here slate might be a contender. So slate 900 could be a good color. We're gonna make the BGB slate 900, and oh, I didn't realize this. It is the color of this whole website. I'll probably choose gray, like gray 800. That sounds like a good color. So I'll make it BG gray 800. And then for the navbar, I can even make it something different from the body. So in the navbar over here, I can make it have a dark color of BG gray 900. So it has a distinction between the navbar and the bottom. Now, with that in mind, since I just added a background for dark mode in the navbar, we can see that both the navbar and the bottom have this separation. Great. Now we can easily switch between how our website looks like depending on what mode we are in. But how do I allow the user to switch that directly in the website? Because the way I'm doing it right now is through the appearance of my website, of my computer, and the appearance of my Chrome browser. But we want to allow the user to maybe click this toggle theme button and switch it automatically. So the way we can do this is actually extremely simple. So the way Tailwind is implementing dark and light mode is that if you look at the code over here, and I open this so that the website is visible. If I go into the page here and I pull this up, so this is the page, right? This is the element, the HTML element that we are rendering. Well, to do that, it's actually very simple, because the way that Tailwind implements this kind of dark mode functionality is through the fact that they add a class name to the document element called dark whenever it's supposed to be in dark mode. And then through the keywords that we have over here, it knows what styles to apply if that class name is in the document. So if we want to toggle between dark and light mode, all we have to do is, if we want to add a class that should be in dark mode, now on this button, we can pass an on click, just like this. And we want to basically toggle through the dark class name in the document element. So I'll grab the document of this page. I'll grab the document element. I'll access its class lists. And I'm going to toggle a new class called dark. By toggle, I mean if that class isn't in the class list of our page, it will add it. If it is there, it will remove it. So now with this, we can click on toggle theme and it will allow us to switch between dark and light mode. So it's as simple as that. There's other things you can consider as well, like, for example, keeping the user preferred theme in mind. So save it, for example, in your local storage so that next time they come to the website, this is we remember what theme they chose. But that's all a little bit outside of Tailwind specific, so I won't be explaining in this video. Now let's learn about a super useful topic, which is the customization of your own colors. Because when you get to a point where you're working with dark and light mode, you end up repeating a lot of colors that are very specific. Like this color over here, BG Gray 800. So when I switch to dark mode, right, I want maybe when it's in light mode for the text to, instead of being black, for it to be the color of the background when it's in dark mode. So for example, I could grab this color, gray 900, and I can make it such that the text is gray 900 when it's in light mode. So you see, now it switched a bit, and when I switch, it adapts to that. I could make it something like gray 800 as well, but I prefer actually a little bit darker, so I'll make it gray 900. Now, we have three colors on this website. We have white, we have gray 800, and we have gray 900. But memorizing what's the purpose of gray 800 and gray 900 and white is a bit hard, because maybe when you're working with many elements in your page, you kind of want to assign a color to a specific like purpose, because like BG white and BG gray 800 are colors for the background. They are the purpose of them is to be the background of the page. Maybe instead of saying BG white and BG gray 800, I can instead just say BG background. And what if by just saying BG background, calling this color background, I don't even need to specify the dark and the light mode values, because just by saying this, it would handle both scenarios. Well, you can do this by creating custom colors. So what I want to do is I want to go here to our CSS file, and you see that in here we have this theme. Now, a theme is how you are able to define some colors and styles that are reused throughout your application. So the way we can create, for example, a custom color is by adding double dashes and then writing the word color and choosing a name for this color. In this example, we're calling it background. Now, in here, you can put the color that is associated with this color that you're creating. For example, in this case, our background is white. So I'll set the color to white. For example, in this example, the color is white. And because I want it to be white, I can just put like hexadecimal that would make it white. Now we're getting this error here, and I guess it's because we forgot to put a semicolon here. But you see that now when I want to use this color called background that we created in the theme, I can just copy that name. Instead of saying BG white, I say BG background, and it maintains it being white. Now, if you want to see this being something different, we can switch it to like green, and it will actually adapt to that color, even though we're using the name background here. So let's bring it back to white. Now, what happens when I switch this? Well, it goes back to the black color, right? The dark mode color. But I have to specify that this is the color that we want for the background in dark mode. What if I could just specify it in our CSS file, not having to actually, just by putting BG background, it would know what color we want. Well, to do that, I can come here and I can add a dark class. And inside of it, I can specify what the color background will be in dark mode. More specifically, we want it to be the BG gray 800. So I'm going to come here to the colors, and I can see what BG gray 800 is. It's this color over here, and we can actually see that the color is this value over here. We can actually use a converter. There's like a bunch of Tailwind color converters to hexadecimal online that you can use. I just picked one of them over here, and you'll see that I converted and got the correct color. Now, I don't have to have this. I can just delete this. You'll see that now it all remains the same, right? It remains the same color. It's slightly different because of the hexadecimal, but I don't have to put the dark mode version. And when I toggle theme, it still works. It switches between the light mode and the dark mode by just using one color that we defined. And we defined a light version of it and a dark version of it. And just by calling the name like this, we don't have to worry. Same thing with the text. For example, we can have a primary text color. I could come over here and I can create a color, call it primary, and I'll also make it, I'll make it be dark actually. So I'm gonna make it be around this, and I'll do the same thing here for dark mode, but in dark mode, I believe it will be white. And then actually I'll do this. I mean, I could just use literally the word white as well, but I'll use the same as this. And then in here, instead of saying text gray 900 and switching the color of the text in dark mode, I can just say text primary. And like I said, everything still works. So this is how you create custom colors. You can just call it whatever you want. You define on the theme the light mode version, and on the dark class the dark mode version, and you can use that class name everywhere else in your project. Now, in order for us to learn the last concept, I want you guys to copy and paste this code over here, this HTML. This is all we did. It's basically we expanded the website. We added a couple sections. So I added here a hero section, all using different class names that we have seen before. Now, there are a couple other ones that we haven't seen it. For example, I don't think we've seen flex. No, we did see flex grow, but we haven't seen max width to XL. We also haven't seen transition, and we haven't seen the opacity utility being used this way. Now, a lot of it we have seen so far. So the reason why I wanted to do it like this is because it's impossible for me to teach you guys every single class, every single utility that Tailwind has, and I don't think that would be valuable at all. I think you guys, with the basic core classes, core utilities, you guys can use that to infer how other classes are named and what they do. And that's how I learned. I learned by learning all of the basic ones that I already taught you guys, and then I just built websites. And whenever I saw something like, for example, oh, opacity 80, what does this mean? Well, probably means that when you hover this 8 element over here, this link, the opacity of this link will become 80% instead of 100. And if that's the case, which, by the way, the link is this button, you see that it kind of is. It's kind of like that. Now, what I want to do is I want to teach you guys about layers in Tailwind. Now, what are Tailwind layers? Well, Tailwind allows us to define different layers in which we can separate our code in, depending on its purpose and category. So there are 3 layers that we can use. So there's the base layer, there is the components layer, and there is the utilities layer. Now, they all have different purposes. Now, the base layer allows you to add any base styles. It is directly applicable to basic elements like headings, paragraphs, images, stuff like that. So if you want to apply any style that, for example, would apply to an H1 tag or to an image tag or even to a button, and it would apply to all of those uses in your website, you would use a base layer. You would apply styles to the base layer. Then we have components. This is for when you want to specify multiple CSS properties to a reusable component that you're going to be using in your project. We're going to actually convert this website that we created over here into some component layers and also some styles that we put into our base layer. And finally, utilities is one-off property classes. For example, we can create a class name that's similar to how we have here class names like item center and padding ag6. We can create a class name that when we call, it will apply one specific styling. So we'll start with the easiest one, which is, or not the easiest one, but the simplest one, which is the base layer. If you want to apply styles to some base elements, like for example, let's apply a style that goes and applies to all of the A tags in our website. We have a bunch of them. I could come over here and I could declare the layer, and I can go to base. Then inside of this base layer, I can go ahead and declare any styles that I want to use and apply into our A tag. Now how do I apply Tailwind class names to this A tag? Well, you use the apply directive, and it allows us to apply a piece of style that will, a piece of class, a Tailwind class name that will apply to all use cases of this element. For example, if I want to make all of the A tags in this project be a pink color, so let's make it pink 500, I can do this. Now it's given us an error, and it's because of this comment over here. I'll just delete the comments, it was just for explanation. But you see that now every A tag applied in our website will have that. And you can apply a bunch of things. I can make it such that every A tag will have a text of 5XL to make it bigger. I can make it whatever I want. So this is a way for you to apply a global style, and not only apply a global style, because obviously if I want to apply styles to my A tag, I could just go ahead and use the normal CSS route and then change here the font size to like 300 pixels, right? And that would apply to all of them. But the whole purpose of doing it this way with the base layer is that you're able to use Tailwind class names that apply to the whole element. Now, the second layer is the component layers. So with the component layer, we can actually do something real cool. So let me just comment this out for now, and let's go here to the component layer, and let's grab one of our elements over here. So you see how in the hero section, right, we have here both of these buttons. They're not actual buttons, they're actually A tags, but we kind of style them to look like buttons. What if instead of putting this class name over here, which is very similar for both of them, I could instead create a button class, a component that I could just reuse whenever I wanted to have something like this. So I could do that by coming over here to the components layer and adding something like this. And now I have this class name called button that if I were to replace this with, it would apply all of the same styles. You see, keep all of the same styles with one class name that I apply all of the styles here, and I can reuse it everywhere else in our website. Now I can do the same thing with this one over here. But instead of using button, because this one is actually a different version of the button, it's like kind of like an outline, I could do this. I can say button outline. And then here I could replace this with the button outline. Now, we could technically grab every class name, every item in this page and pull it out into this components layer, but then it just becomes normal CSS. So here's the important thing that I want you guys to understand. If you're going to rewrite this button class, like the same style of button, multiple times in your website, it makes sense to put it into the components layer and then just call it like this whenever you need it. But if it's something like this, where this is the only time where you're going to apply this specific combination of classes, you don't need to export this and make it into its own item, right? There's different situations in which you might, for example, I think the nav link over here, this links over here could be extracted into its own class, but many of them don't actually need it. Now, the last one is the utilities. So I could come over here and I could add the layer utilities. And this one is less useful in my opinion, but it's kind of like, for example, I could create here a utility called border red. I could say border red. Then here I can apply a border 8 and I'll make the border be red 400. I'll just put a color to it. Now, this is a very specific class name that only applies one thing, which is it applies this color, right? It applies one functionality to it. Now, somewhere in here, I can add, it's not like we're completely replacing the class like we're doing here with the button, with the components. We're actually just adding to a small part of it. So even on the button that we have, the button class, I can add the border red class. And you see that now it has that border red properties that we created over here. So it's a way for us to actually create our own Tailwind utility. So our own Tailwind class. Instead of creating a whole component that has a bunch of classes inside of it. So these are the three layers, and they are super important because if you're building a large scale project, you're probably going to have your one CSS file that will have your themes and your layers, and you need to keep track of all of that. Now, this is all the concepts that I wanted to teach in this video. Obviously, I didn't want to go too long into this video because at this point, my biggest advice for you is for you to just go ahead and try to build your own website instead of just playing, like trying to watch someone building one, just build it yourself. Because the more you find yourself wanting to do something with Tailwind, as long as you know the most basic things like layouts and how to style your text and stuff like that, then you can at least get something in the screen. And then when you don't know one class or another, you just go ahead and follow what I mentioned, which is go to the cheat sheet, go to the colors website, and again, all of that will be in the description. Also, if you're interested in learning React.js from me, just go ahead and click the link below. We just launched our new course platform. It is called Web Dev Ultra, and it will contain a bunch of courses in the future. Right now we only have the React.js course, but we are preparing a Next.js course, and a course on Tailwind will also exist. So make sure you guys go ahead and click the link on the description if you want to check it out. It's something that I'm really excited for, and I got a lot of positive feedback from you guys. So if you've never checked it out, just go ahead and click the link in the description. Again, thank you so much for watching the video, and thank you Brilliant for sponsoring this video, and I see you guys next time.